Well, good morning and happy Friday. My name is John Handy, Communications Director for the House Republican Caucus. I'd like to welcome you to our House and Senate Republican media availability, and thank you for joining us. With us today are House Republican Leader JT Wilcox, House Republican Floor Leader Jacquelin Maycumber, and Ranking Republican on the House Appropriations Committee, Drew Stokesberry. And from the Senate, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun, Senate Republican Whip Keith Wagoner, and Ranking Republican on the Senate Ways and Means Committee, Lynda Wilson. After a few opening remarks, we will open it up to questions with Rachel LaCourte from the Associated Press first, and then I will call on you too if you have a follow-up question. And if you have any technical difficulties, feel free to email me throughout the event. And now I would like to hand it over to Representative Drew Stokesberry.
Well, thanks, John, and thank you for everybody participating today from the press, and thanks to everybody who's watching online or on TVW. I'm Drew Stokesberry, represent the 31st Legislative District, and I'm also the Ranking Republican on the House Appropriations Committee. From the House, joined by our leader, JT Wilcox, and our floor leader, Jacquelin Maycumber, and I think they'll have a few things to add in a little bit, and then I'll also hand it over in a minute to Senator Wilson to talk about the Senate's perspective. But obviously the big news in legislative goings on yesterday was the governor's proposed budget release. And I think the best word to characterize my reaction was underwhelming. I would have thought that after 8 years of practice, he might have been able to come up with a few new bold ideas. But apparently somebody told him that the ninth time is the charm, and he took that to heart. I think a lot of his proposals are just the same versions of what he's tried before. Cap and trade is yet another scheme to make a minimal impact on global carbon emissions, but have an enormous impact on working families' budgets for gasoline and electricity and home heating. And I think that will be very bad for Washington State. Disappointed that there was virtually nothing to actually solve or address the looming homelessness crisis. It was at the forefront of everybody's mind at the start of last session before we got distracted by coronavirus. But the problem never got solved, and the governor's budget certainly doesn't try to do anything new to solve it. I think that we have heard for years from folks on the other side of the aisle that working families pay more than their fair share. And I think we've heard from folks in my caucus and the Senate Republicans caucus that everybody pays too much taxes. And I think that means it's high time to finally fund the working families tax credit, and was quite disappointed that the governor decided not to fund that, but simply to wave his hand and promise that in a few years, maybe it will be one potential program that his new cap and trade program might fund. But working families need relief now more than ever. They've had a very rough 2020, and I think a lot of people are very anxious about what 2021 has in store, and this would have been the best time to do that. But instead of a tax rebate, he is proposing to raise their gas prices, raise their home energy prices, and raise their raise the cost of their health care. So Republicans, I think, will continue to lead on solutions for keeping more small businesses from closing their doors, providing actual meaningful relief to hardworking families, and passing a budget that is fiscally responsible. This proposal would mean that if it's enacted, the state spending will have gone up 85% since the governor was elected. I don't think very many people have seen their own household incomes or business incomes go up by 85% during that time. And I think we owe more responsibility to Washington's taxpayers so that when we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic and recession again, we're in much more sound financial footing. And so was disappointed and underwhelmed by what the governor came up with, but I think that folks in my caucus and the Senate Republican caucus can offer a lot better ideas for the future path forward for Washington. So with that, I'll hand it over to Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Drew. So I was encouraged by the governor looking at, or taking a serious look at at opening up schools and getting kids back into school. It's been a priority for us for months, and our metrics have actually shown that. In fact, you can look directly at a school, the Meade School District in Spokane area, where they've been open since August. They have like 3,000 kids in that school, and it's working. And so we do know that it can work. And I think that that's real important, at least for many of our constituents. Essentially our budget is balanced, and we don't expect a deficit. And, it's a far cry from what we were looking at 6, 7, 8 months ago with a $9 billion hole. I think that, I'm disappointed that there's a lot of spending increases by $5.5 billion, and raising taxes when our small businesses are collapsing and our families are losing jobs. So I think that we need to keep looking at ways to help our businesses, in turn putting our people back to work. That's the best answer to get our economic engine rolling again. And then we need to look at the unemployment insurance trust fund that needs to be replenished, but that will be on the backs of small business again. And, for the most part, the reason why we had that money in there in the first place was because they were the ones that put it in there in the first place. So anyway, I think that Drew covered it very well. And I'm looking forward to this role, so I'll be digging much deeper into the details, as I always do. So thank you very much, and I guess we'll turn it over to John. Is that who?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's now open it up to questions. Rachel LaCourte from the Associated Press.
Hi, good morning. The first audit of the Employment Security Department was released this morning, and among the findings was that weak internal security protocols led to the fraud that we saw earlier this year. Have any of you had a chance to look at that report, and what is your reaction?
Well, I'll say that I saw the headline come across my other screen at about 9:59, and who knows, that maybe that was your story, Rachel. So no, I haven't had a chance to see that. I'm glad that it's coming out. I wish it would have come out earlier. Some of you also highlighted the challenges that the state auditor had in terms of having access to people inside that department. We talked a couple of weeks ago, I think, about the fact that, A, you make a mistake in management, B, then you get in the way of trying to find a solution. Those are two really bad things on top of each other. I hope that the press really gives this a lot of play. I think if a everyday state employee was found being irresponsible with a much smaller number of dollars, they would be out of here faster than you could say their name. And the fact that there has been, no one take responsibility for this so far, I think is egregious.
I couldn't agree more. I think I haven't seen the audit yet, but based on what we've heard so far, the real question in my mind is, does the governor and the executive branch take responsibility? I mean, it's one thing to make a mistake. It's another to say, hey, we're never going to take responsibility for it. We're never going to fix it. We're going to allow it to happen over and over again. And I think that is unacceptable. So far, we have not seen anybody there just stand up and say, this is my responsibility. I'm going to own it and take actions to correct it in the future. This hasn't happened.
And I would agree with Senator Braun, and this is exactly why so many Washingtonians are so frustrated with government. So many of my constituents already feel like government doesn't have to share in the pain of the shutdown. They're watching their kids be kept out of school. They're watching their businesses have to close. But they look at every single government employee who continues to draw a paycheck, and the governor as well. And they already feel like the government isn't sharing any of the pain. And now a high-ranking appointee loses $500 million to Nigerian scammers, and there's no accountability. And it just continues to sow mistrust in the government. And I think that's wrong. I think the governor would have much more moral authority with Washingtonians if he took some responsibility and held those responsible accountable.
I think that you also have to think about how many people are now having to pay for the errors that have been made over the course of all these prior months. I mean, we have people that I'm hearing about that are getting bills now for $11,000 and $14,000. They didn't have the money in the first place. Now they're being told that they have to repay it. And that is creating, we already talk about the mental anguish that this pandemic has brought on to many people. now look what we're doing, especially in the Christmas season. So, this is just unbelievable.
Rachel, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I did want to ask about the budget. I know that you all don't agree with the taxes in the governor's proposal, but do you agree with some of the priorities of the budget as it relates to coronavirus relief for businesses, rental, food assistance, and other areas? And if so, how would you suggest paying for those programs? Would there be specific cuts that you would want to see or a different source of revenue?
Yeah, Rachel, this is Representative Stokesberry. I agree in the sense that, of course, we need to do something to help businesses. I think what the governor is proposing is too little and too late. Republicans have wanted to come back to session to do exactly this and other things for the last 6 months and have been told no, even though our quote unquote peer states like Oregon and California are coming back early. And I also don't think $100 million is going to prove to be enough. I am heartened by the governor suggesting that he's found a way to avoid UI rate increases, but as with a lot of things in his budget, I haven't really found the backup documentation to show his work. And so I'm holding out hope that he does have an idea, but I haven't really seen it yet. But I do think that this should be one of our top priorities, but I think that we need to work more quickly than what the governor's proposing and perhaps be a little bit bolder than what he's proposing.
Rachel, you can't tax the dead. And the post-COVID economy, we don't know what it's going to look like. And small businesses fund the budget, which protects the most vulnerable. And I have grave concerns about the future of protecting the most vulnerable in our healthcare. And that all starts with the basis of making sure we have a post-COVID economy. So you cannot continue to tax the industry that is suffering so much and how much people are going through. So taxing the dead really doesn't do anything. So we really need to go inside and talk about these solutions. And like Representative Stokesberry said, a few $100 million is not going to do it. And we got to figure out solutions quickly and now.
If you stop to think about it, the rainy day fund is there for emergencies such as this. So I also agree that 100 million is a drop in the bucket when it comes to all the failing businesses that are happening right now, particularly in our hospitality association in that area. They are struggling to just stay afloat every day and crying on this. I hear from them every single week and they're beside themselves. They are losing and they don't know what to do about it, and they're not getting help from their government.
Rachel, I was pleased to see in the governor's budget a placeholder, at least for behavioral health. And it looks like the governor adopted some Republican talking points there, because I saw that he wanted to put an emphasis on facilities in local communities, which is something we've been talking about for years and have had good bipartisan support. So we at least agree on that concept, but I would say we perhaps differ on who ought to be running those facilities. You may be familiar with yet another problem at Western State that was just reported where they're having to let people go. But what popped out to me in the governor's budget, and he needs to be very careful about first steps and thinking about the cascading effect of that afterwards. He wants to release 5,000 or early release 5,000 inmates into society during a chaotic time in our history as a cost savings measure. Well, that means he's going to be displacing the people who bravely fill those correctional officer jobs. I saw an estimate of 200 to 300 people who will basically be getting their pink slip just before Christmas based on the governor's proposal. Those are hardworking correctional facility people, Teamsters, who support us every day. It's kind of a slap in the face to make an incremental budget change based on their backs.
Okay, let's go to Austin Jenkins of Northwest News Network.
Thanks, John. My question would just be about early COVID relief action at the beginning of the session, and what I know there was mention of the governor's proposed 200 million, perhaps being a drop in the bucket. If you all were in charge, and to the extent you can influence what this might look like, what do you think is needed in the first few weeks of session, what should the legislature pass, and what would the size of it be like, and what sort of relief would you be looking for?
Well, I guess I can start. One of the things that I am looking at is relief for the unemployment insurance tax experience rate increase. We're looking at, I saw the report yesterday that it's not quite $1 billion, but it's close to $1 billion increase for these businesses who right now, the ones that are affected the most are the ones that are going to be hit with this increase. And so I think that this is a perfect opportunity to use the funds from the rainy day fund to get this out the door right away, get in, and there's it's bipartisan. I mean, we do believe that. I don't know about the dollar figure, but we do need to get in quickly so that ESD has the ability to affect those rates before the bill is due for those businesses. So that would be something that we could do right off the bat.
Hey, Austin, I saw you ask the governor something along these lines, and his answer was that the Republicans hadn't proposed anything. And I know that all the press that's here saw us over and over and over make proposals that we want to come back to special session and take early action. And to hear him talk about immediate action after putting that off for 6 months was troubling to me. 2 weeks ago when we were here, we rolled out the Representative McEwen package of 4 or 5 bills that made an immediate impact on the cash flow of struggling businesses. He's a business person too. He understands that to keep their head above water, you have to impact their cash flow immediately. So there is a package. The governor has seen that. All of you have seen it. The public's seen it. We could do this Christmas week if we had to. And there will be people going under. There will be businesses and the people that depend on it going under between now and the beginning of the session.
Austin, did you have a follow-up question?
I guess just is there, I think the governor mentioned 100 million for additional small business and hospitality business relief and 100 million for landlord tenant grants. Can somebody just address your response to that specific proposal? Is it the right way to spend money? Is it the right amount? What would you do the same or differently?
Yeah, Austin, this is Representative Stokesberry. You know, I think both of those numbers might be smaller than what's necessary. I'm still trying to dig into exactly what he's proposing. As I alluded to a minute ago, when the governor releases his budget documents, they are not nearly as comprehensive or robust as when the legislature releases its own budget. And it's a lot of top line stuff, but not always the most detailed. So still trying to work through some of that. But I do think what Representative Wilcox mentioned that Representative McEwen is working on, that should really be the most urgent priority is helping the businesses out with cash flow, whether that's allowing them to suspend B&O payments so they can free up some cash to keep employees on payroll. What Senator Wilson and many others are talking about, shoring up the UI account immediately so that they're not faced with tripling of their unemployment insurance rates. Those are payments that businesses are going to have to make in January, and we can do some quick things to make it so that they don't have to make those payments and they can concentrate on the payments that actually keep their business alive, like paying their vendors and paying their employees.
So I'd like to jump in on this. I mean, it's hard to say, like Drew said, based on what we have so far, it's hard to imagine any help for business isn't a good thing, but this really is kind of too little too late for many businesses. And keep it in perspective. We have essentially a balanced budget in front of us prior to the governor's proposal and $2 billion in the rainy day fund that we could invest in pandemic relief for businesses, for, across the board. $2 billion. And what the governor does with that is he spends all of it, plus he adds a whole slew of new taxes and spends all of that mostly on more government. This is another example of folks who are on a very comfortable government salary, out of touch, tone deaf with the rest of the state, who's barely making it. They think, oh, it's all good. We'll spend a bunch more money on more government, and we'll throw a little bit in, $100 million in to help businesses. It's backwards. They just don't seem to understand how hard it is if you're not getting that, biweekly government check. It's as you might mention, it's pretty frustrating to me and a lot of folks around the state that they don't seem at all interested in even connecting with people that are having a hard time getting through this.
Next, we have Essex Porter of Cairo TV.
Yes, good morning. Would a couple of you address your objections to the governor's tax proposals? What's wrong with capital gains tax that targets the most wealthy in our state? What's wrong about an insurance premium $3 tax where the money goes for building up the public health infrastructure?
Yeah, Essex, this is Representative Stokesberry again. Capital gains tax, just like the governor's been trying to propose it for the last 9 years, Republicans have been explaining why it's the wrong direction for Washington State for the last 9 years. First of all, if you believe that the tax code is unfair because it makes low-income people pay more than their fair share, the solution isn't to go out and punish people who have the fortune and skill to be successful in life. The solution is to offer a tax rebate to the people who are paying too much. And the Democrats have talked about this for the last 10 years with the working families tax credit, but they've not once put their money where their mouth is. I think that's wrong, and I think we ought to fund the working families tax credit. That's a better solution to any perceived tax inequities in our system. As far as policy, it is a sound way to write a budget. As volatile as our budget has been this year, Oregon's and California's have been volatile, and that's because capital gains tax is 7.5 times more volatile than sales tax. So when we want reliability and predictability to fund schools and mental health and social services, relying on a capital gains tax is the worst way to do that. It's also of dubious constitutionality. The Supreme Court would have to reverse their precedent in order for it to be legal, and it would at best be tied up in litigation for 2 or 3 years. And again, if we need money now, taxing a source that we're not going to see come in for 3 years is not a good way to do that. And then lastly, it's just plain bad economic policy. There's a reason that only one other state in the entire country taxes capital gains at higher than they tax ordinary income. Washington would be the second. Economists of all stripes realize that a capital gains preferential rate is not a handout to the wealthy, but it is a way to incentivize investment. And that's what's actually going to create jobs. Just in the last couple months, several huge companies, including Tesla and Oracle, have left California for Texas. And if we continue down this path, Washington businesses will do the same. As for the healthcare tax, why on earth in the middle of a pandemic the governor would want to make healthcare more expensive is beyond me. The $3 is actually $3 a month. That works out to $35 or $40 a year. And for a lot of people, $35 or $40 is a meaningful amount of money. Perhaps not for somebody like me, maybe not for somebody like you, Essex, but there are a lot of working Washingtonians where $40 is what's going to put them put their checking account in the red.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in here on the other taxes or de facto taxes that we're not talking about, the low carbon fuel standard, the cap and trade. These are enormously regressive policies, and yet we're kind of looking the other way. Nothing in the governor's proposal is about being more progressive. This is about raising more money and doing what kind of single focus on carbon, regardless of the impact on working families.
We have proclamations and the governor signs them every month because Republican principles work. And those are reducing fees, reducing bureaucratic restrictions. And when there was an emergency, we all came together and say, hey, we have to reduce fees right now. We have to stop the bleeding. That is why we have proclamations, because Republican principles work and they work in an emergency. Now we need to get together and talk about those. And just like Senator Braun mentioned with the low carbon fuel standard, I mean, that's not domestic oil. It has to be, when you reach a certain volatility point, it has to be overseas. That has to be taken from Brazilian sugar beets and Indonesian palm oil. I mean, you're going overseas to then tax your basic domestic area over 35 cents to $1 a gallon. Are you kidding me? This is a pandemic. I mean, this is not a domestic product once you reach a certain level. So we need to talk about what we really need to talk about. We need to protect healthcare. We need to protect our small businesses to pay their employees to continue the post-COVID economy, because that is the most important thing. So we continue to talk and protect everyone. And I agree, we do not need cross-the-board cuts. I've been adamantly opposed to it. I've been mentioning it repeatedly. That happened in 2008, and that was wrong. And we really need to look at priorities, priorities, priorities.
And I think one more thing that you should think about is, or we all should think about, is that this is not the only tax increase or creation of a new tax that is being discussed. I mean, we've got, that may be the governor's budget, but we also have that the employer head tax. That's basically the Seattle Amazon tax that's being discussed, and it's put out there, as well as a digital sales tax and others that that we are going to be looking at. So we're looking at a great amount of tax increases across the board.
Essex, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
We covered that.
Next, we will go to Sarah Gensler of McClatchy.
This is sort of following up on Rachel's question earlier, and maybe I missed it, but I'm not sure I heard an answer to how you would fund the priorities you do agree with. I think Senators Wilson and Braun have mentioned the rainy day fund. Do you think that'd be enough to fund what's needed, or is there another source of funding you would recommend?
Well, our budget is balanced right now, and we have, I mean, just with the revenue forecast that's coming in, we're going to have $4 billion more coming in now. So that would be sufficient in some cases. So besides, I mean, you're looking at $4 billion plus you're looking at $2 billion from the rainy day fund. That's quite a substantial amount of money.
Yeah, I agree. If you look at the outlook as maintenance level grows, we are, you know, essentially balanced in the next 2 years and early over the next 4.5 years. And you have $2 billion in rainy day fund to invest to help our economy, to help our most vulnerable. We can absolutely, and that's on the back of what is a very robust budget. We've talked before about, you know, state employees are well compensated, higher than on average than private sector in 38 out of 39 counties. Our social services spending on a per capita basis is higher than California. And there are things we could do to improve that, don't get me wrong, but broadly, it's very good. We've more than doubled our investment in mental health. So we have a very robust budget. Our economy is amazingly resilient in the face of a worldwide pandemic. Thanks to the wisdom of the voters, we have a large rainy day fund. We have everything we need to address our challenges without new taxes. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, Sarah, this is Representative Stokesberry again, and you know, the budget picture didn't look nearly as rosy in June when revenue projections were sort of at their nadir. But while there are certainly some question marks about how the economy overall is going to rebound, revenue collections themselves have recovered a lot more quickly than maybe we thought over the summer. And that's really good news for budget writers and really good news for people who depend on state programs. You know, I don't think any of us, I think all of us are intellectually honest enough to not come out here and wave our hands and insist that we can do things when we know we can't. All of us are confident that there is a way to pay for this. One other thing to keep in mind is that the governor, one of the few good things he did do over the last few months was have his agencies put together a series of reduction options. And there are plenty of proposals in there that are not good ideas. And I'm not suggesting that anything an agency pointed out in that exercise we should do, but there are some that are good ideas, and we don't spend nearly enough time looking at ways to save money on existing programs. But I think this is a good year to do that because the agencies have already done a lot of the work. But I am incredibly optimistic that based on how quickly revenue is recovering, based on some potential savings ideas that agencies themselves have pointed out over the past few months, there is a way to preserve services for the most vulnerable, pay for some of these badly needed things we're talking about to keep businesses afloat, to provide relief to working Washingtonians, and still balance the budget without new taxes.
Sarah, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, this is about K12. The governor didn't call for the kind of early action that some legislators and stakeholders have called for to address anticipated funding shortages due to drops in enrollment. Is that something that you agree with? Would you, is that a missing piece here? Do you think there's another way to address it?
Well, I'll jump in there. You know, I think this is one area where I am cautiously optimistic about the governor's approach. Obviously, I think there's still a lot more information that we need, both in terms of what he's proposing, because while he didn't backfill the caseload decrease, or the savings related to the caseload decrease, he did provide like a flat $400 or $500 million for learning catch-up. And I think that in principle is a good idea, but as with everything in K12 and the rest of the legislature, the difficulty is in the details. I think the really big variable here is, you know, I can't speak for all 147 legislators, but at least personally, I've not yet been able to get a full grasp on how exactly school district budgets are being affected right now. Obviously, the drop in enrollment means that their state apportionments are going to go down. By and large, their teacher contracts are fixed, whether they're getting their apportionment or not. There are plenty of other expenses, though, that schools are presumably spending less on. They probably don't have to spend much to heat and cool their buildings. They probably don't have to spend a lot on hourly custodial staff when their buildings are sitting empty. On the other hand, they probably have some new costs like technology solutions. And how that all nets out at the end of the day is a piece of data that I think, at least me, but I think many other legislators are missing. And I think that will really drive how we shape the K-12 budget. And while I might have some questions about how the governor implements his idea to send some money to fund school catch-up, I think, and while I'd probably say it's a problem of his own making, because lots of other states have had in-person school without any sort of meaningful coronavirus transmission, I think his heart's in the right place, and I hope there's a way to do that in a way that really does deliver results for the kids.
I think there's also a unique chance. Normally, schools don't have a lot of tools to impact their own revenue. But in this case, because the revenue challenge is there because of much lower attendance, because of difficulties with distance learnings, the fact that they have an opportunity now to open up at a much faster rate than they had thought a short time ago means that they can be very creative. They can safely bring children back to school and probably make a large impact on that attendance figure, which will in turn make a big impact on their revenue.
Okay, next we'll go to Joe O'Sullivan of the Seattle Times.
Yeah, hi, sorry I'm jumping on here late. I may have missed this. I'm curious with Democratic leadership trying to limit their members to a certain number of bills. I'm curious what the Republican leadership and committee chairs have been advising their own people, and if there are specific pieces of Republican legislation you're hoping to get hearings on in what seems like is going to be a sort of limited session.
I guess I'll jump in on this. So you're referring to the restrictions on in-person legislative activity, restrictions on the Capitol. I think a couple things are going on. One, we recognize we got to find a way to do this safely. There should be no question about that. But we also have genuine concerns about, access to democracy, as others like to put it. That we have ability for our citizens, for stakeholders to participate in the legislative process, either remotely or in person to the maximum extent possible. And to the extent they cannot, and I think that's just going to be a fact that they will not have the same access they're used to, we should limit the types of bills we do. We should focus on our most important priorities. Certainly the budget is going to be more complicated than in previous years because you got a lot of supplemental stuff to do. You may have some early action stuff like we've discussed, and then you have the biennial and the 4-year balance. So it's going to be more complicated, and some public health stuff that I think still needs to be done to keep us, get us on a better path on the pandemic. But broadly, at least in the Senate, and I suspect the House may be similar, we're trying to focus on those most important things. Let's stay away from the controversial, the things that don't need to be done this year, and focus on the things that get after public health, our budget, the economy, and let everything else wait until we have better access by the public and stakeholders around the state.
Yeah, and Joe, you might be referring to the speaker's guidance, and she's asked their members to limit the number of bills that they draft. And, a representative has a right to speak, has a right to communicate with the public, and has a right to drop bills. The speaker and the committee chairs have the ability to throttle how many are heard and how many make it to either the committee level for a vote or the floor for a vote. So they control most of the ways to lessen the workload. But I will ask my members to check in with staff and be considerate of the staff, because we have a staff that is very dedicated. They will work 20 hours a day for weeks on end. I've seen it done. Oh, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I've seen them work themselves into a state of exhaustion before. And I don't want that to happen. And my members are considerate, and I will ask them to check in with staff as well and make sure that we are doing the appropriate amount of bill writing.
Do you have a follow-up, Joe?
Yeah, for anyone here, and to that point, Mr. Minority Leader, are there Republican priorities? I mean, usually at least some Republican legislation is advanced, if not to just a hearing, actually to get through. Are there priorities of Republican ideas that you'd hope to get through in terms of legislation?
Well, I think at the very top of our list, and the reason that we've been featuring it over and over again, are the business recovery bills that Representative McEwen presented. We also have some ideas that are important to us, so that in the future, the governor's emergency powers are not ended, but require the cooperation and the involvement of the legislature. I understand he's got a majority and control in the legislature, both chambers. So that doesn't mean that he doesn't get to do the things that are the most important, but I think they at least get a hearing, they get discussion. The impact on people around the state of Washington and throughout the economy gets a public hearing in that case, and that's really important to us. We probably will see things passed under those conditions that we wouldn't like, but at least everyone would have an opportunity to be heard in a way that they haven't been heard to date. We absolutely want to be part of strengthening public health. And as you know, the minority, I think, probably has the greatest voice when it comes to a budget debate. And I'm looking forward to that. The one time in a whole legislative session that the minority has the opportunity to present things that are almost guaranteed to get a vote is when we offer budget amendments. And the priorities that Representative Stokesberry mentioned a little while ago will absolutely be part of our discussions. And I think at budget passage time, the Democrats will have a chance to vote yes or no on those, and so will we. I would also like to ask Representative Maycumber, who is our floor leader, and really works her tail off on trying to define priorities, although we're still a little early for that, to ask if she's got anything that she wants to add.
You know, this is an unprecedented time. We say this over and over again, but it really boils down to, can you buy bread for your family? Can you pay for your gas to get to work? Do you have a job, or are your kids at home? You know, are your kids able to go to school so you can enter the workforce again? And I do have concerns about, you know, women staying home right now with their kids not at school, or paying for daycare to send their kids to the school and paying for them to be there. And then making sure that you feel safe in your home and public safety. So, I mean, it really boils down to surviving the post-COVID economy and making sure that we can provide for our families, and that we have the ability to take care of ourselves, take care of our family, buy the food, and have health care. it's really basic this year, and we have to make sure we listen to our constituents. They want to go to work, they want to pay their rent, and they want to have the ability to have their kids educated. And I think that we can come together on a lot of these issues and really work out solutions. And just like everyone said, they're optimistic at the governor's response to the schools. This is great. This is what we've been calling for 6 months. This is why we asked for a special session, and he did it. That's great. We could have come together 6 months ago and said this needs to happen for making sure that we have a post-COVID economy and our children are educated. It really boils down to basic needs right now, and it really comes to coming together and talking about the solutions.
Next, we will go to Laurel Demkovich of the Spokesman Review.
Thanks, John. I want to ask about the governor's proposals to better support public health systems. And I know you've already said that you don't necessarily support the healthcare insurance tax, but is there a way to better fund and support our public health systems, both now for PPE and testing and also in the future, that you might support that doesn't necessarily involve this tax on healthcare?
Yeah, Laurel, this is Drew Stokesberry. One thing that we hear from the majority every time the budget comes up on the floor is that budgets are about priorities. And for the last 3 or 4 years, the budget has been written exclusively by one party. And that one party has not chosen to prioritize foundational public health. They've had a few individual members talk about it and try to convince the rest of their caucus to make it a priority, but neither the governor nor the caucuses writ large have made it a priority. I was actually given a Public Health Foundation award earlier this year, even though I helped sue the governor over his emergency orders challenging their constitutionality. I still got a public health award because I've been one of the few people in Olympia trying to say that public health really is important and we really should make it a priority. The budget has grown by 85% since the day Jay Inslee got elected, and that should have provided us ample opportunity to fund foundational public health so that we would be better prepared for a pandemic exactly like this one. But the majority party didn't do that. They decided to spend that new money in other places, and only now are saying it's important, but only if we can raise new revenue by taxing people on their own health care. I think there's a much better and much easier way, and that's simply to make it a higher priority than some of the things that are already funded in the budget.
Did you have a follow-up, Laurel?
Yeah, and I apologize if this has already been addressed. My internet's been kind of cutting in and out, but how are you going to, I guess, ensure that the businesses and rental insurance or rental assistance kind of gets through early on in January if you don't necessarily support the governor's initial $200 million proposal?
I don't think anybody said we don't support it. What we said is it's probably too little, too late to help a lot of folks. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Some states have been successful in getting CARES Act dollars out immediately to rental assistance that went to the, the landlords or the ones paying the mortgage. I have concerns that we're going to lose a lot of those rentals. Once you lose rentals, you really lose a section of the housing industry where you can enter the housing. I mean, it's really that bottleneck where you have, an entry level and then you have purchasing a home. And a lot of the rentals in my district are second homes, are elderly that are renting out their home. And right now we really need to make sure, one, that people they're able to pay their rent. And I think a lot of that CARES Act dollars went out in some of those states immediately, and they went out successfully to the homes to keep people in their homes for rental assistance, but also to make sure those mortgages don't lapse. I have grave concerns that if we look towards the future, we may lose those homes to banks, to foreclosures, to those rentals that now really allow that successful entry into housing market. And so I do have concerns that I am supportive. I'm very supportive of making sure people have rental assistance, but also we don't lose a whole industry and a whole rental assistance to banks, to foreclosures. It's a cascading of events. And I think that's something we could talk about, in a special session. We should have been talking about this immediately and how those CARES Act went to those people who needed the rental assistance and needed it immediately. This is a big issue. This is a post-COVID economy issue, and this is something we may be dealing with for quite some time.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and that goes to Jeff Pogula of Como News.
Thank you. I think I've got what I need from the budget, so I'm going to turn to politics a little bit. And I know some of you guys have addressed this in the past week or so, but Loren Culp obviously renewing his attacks on the Republican Secretary of State over the election, saying 500,000 votes illegally cast, things of that nature. And then combined with the fact that two Republican congressmen, congressmen and women from the state signed on to that Texas lawsuit last week that was ultimately dismissed by the U.S. Supreme Court. I guess my question on a political nature, do you guys think that this is doing damage to the Republican Party at a time where you're a minority in Washington state and it's razor thin on the national level?
I think this is a time when all of us just have to do what we think is right. And as you said, John and I made a statement recently, and I think we have been extremely consistent over the last year, talking about political violence, threats of violence, whether it's from the right or the left. I don't think anyone has been as consistent as we are in talking about violence from both sides, not just the other side from us. So we've been very, very open about that. And we do that because that's the right thing to do. We have also said that we've got a lot of confidence in Secretary of State Kim Wyman. She's a national leader when it comes to running good and honest elections. And one thing that has been a little under the radar, I just read that the hand recount was completed in the 5th legislative district, almost 100,000 votes. I've been around these recounts a few times. That is highly scrutinized. There was millions of dollars spent on that election and probably tens of thousands of dollars spent on legal teams watching that hand recount. And guess what? It changed by a net vote of 1. That's the kind of elections. After a hand recount, 100,000 votes, it changed by 1. That's the kind of elections that we're running in Washington.
Yeah, I think JT said pretty much everything I would say. I would just add that not only do I have a lot of faith in Kim Wyman to run a good election system, I also have a lot of faith for her to look into any irregularities. If there is a problem, I trust that she would get after it and find the problem and deal with it. And that's, the foundation of a long-term, fair and honest election system.
Jeff, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess the only follow-up is, would you have a message for Loren Culp?
Who's Loren Culp?
Fair enough.
Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today. And we'll be doing these regularly when the legislative session starts.
Hey, do you guys have a moment for a related follow-up here? This is Joe Sullivan, Seattle Times. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, we've had 2 shootings here at the Capitol campus in 2 weeks. We've had other firearms violations amid rising political tensions here. You had people with long guns banging on the House caucus doors looking for Representative Wilcox last year. Are you guys comfortable that the Capitol campus remains open carry within the Capitol and around the grounds?
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking because, we have had organized rallies for decades that were well organized, very safe, no incidents, and we live in a very volatile time right now. There is the Second Amendment, and this is a little frustrating because you highlight these issues here at the Capitol. There are issues all over the Northwest right now with lawlessness, and I don't see the other side, addressing those quite often.
To that end, Representative Wilcox, when it's your own member, as in Representative Sutherland's comments on Facebook, what do you do about that, and how do you address that, and has that been addressed, or will it be?
Yeah. Well, you already asked me this, and I said, like I have every single time, I don't agree with any statements that have to do with violence or the incitement of violence. And I've had some exchanges with that representative and suggested some better language. And we'll have a caucus conversation about that.
Thank you for getting in a few last questions.
Okay. Did the leaders have any closing remarks?
No, this is I appreciate all those questions.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and we'll be back with you during the legislative session weekly for these, and we'll talk to you then. Thank you so much.